Hello, everybody, and welcome to Silent Podcast. I am Naomi. I am a zoologist, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk about Nebula's show, The Getaway. I am joined by my fellow Jetlag the Game expert extraordinaire, Cover the Mole on Silent Podcast, you might remember. I'm here with JD. JD, thanks for being here. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing wonderful. I wouldn't sure if I'd go as far as to say aficionado or expert, but I am indeed a jet lag enthusiast. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about the new Nebula production.
Right? It is fantastic that we're getting something so different from jet lag, but so up our alley. When they announced it, I could not believe it. And I was so excited. So thank God we get to talk about it today. And thank God you encouraged me to watch Jet Lag the Game when you did.
I knew that this would be something that you would enjoy, and I also wanted someone to talk about this with. So this feels like a full circle moment where we finally get to talk about this thing on a full podcast platform. Super fun.
100%. So I just have a couple like start off questions for you, right? What did you think when you
Hit
saw
me.
that the giveaway was announced that Sam, Adam, and Ben were producing a sort of reality sabotage type show different from anything they had done before for Nebula?
I think so. I know this is true of everything that comes out of Nebula, but the creators really care about the content that they produce. So even though I wasn't entirely sure what exactly to expect out of the Getaway, I knew that it would be something that if I was already enjoying jet lag and enjoying how creative and diverse the design of different jet lag seasons were, I was bound to enjoy the Getaway, or the Getaway would be something up my alley, especially considering that a lot of the same hands are working on this show as well.
Couldn't have honestly said it better myself, especially when like the mole is out right now and the
Mhm.
traders. I'm in a sabotagey kind of mood with my
Yeah,
reality
we're in this
TV.
like social deduction renaissance, I feel like, especially with I know the trust on Netflix too has some of these elements of someone's holding a secret or someone one of these things is not like the other. Yeah, the traders, the mole, all of these shows I feel like are really adding to this social deduction genre and bringing it into the limelight. And as someone who's been like a longtime fan of this genre, I'm excited for it.
Right?
I
Oh
would
my
love to
god.
see it.
Well, let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about what the Getaway is. It is a six-person cast where they will be voting players out along the path to deliver some stolen casino money to Ms. Terry in Colorado. So every day, the group will compete in a challenge, and if they do well, their money stays in the loyal loot, and if they screw up, it goes to the Snitch stash. Each evening, they will vote out who they most suspect of sabotaging them until only two remain. And of course, the twist here is that there's not just one switch, not just one snitch, not just two snitches. There are six snitches in a group of six people.
Every single person is a snitch in this game, and what a twist that is.
I, I
What
was
did you? What was your first impression of that twist?
I was gagged. I was gagged. I can't lie to you. I was gagged. But really, I thought it's a hilarious way to approach a game like this, where you know that nobody's going to know what it is coming into it. I mean, it's kind of only a game show that you can produce one season of, and I do love that it is what it is so far. I think it's so fun. Um, but Six Stitches is so compelling. And then there's a lot of discussion in the episode about can they figure it out? Do they understand that there's more than one person who is a Stitch? And I have a lot of opinions on that. Like, it's always good when you
Mhm.
watch a show and you're like, oh, I have so many opinions on this.
A lot of ideas.
What did you think?
I I was a huge fan of it. I like similarly to you, I was gagged. But I also remember in college I used to play Mafia a lot, and sometimes
Mm,
people who would run these Mafia games would do games where no one was Mafia. So that kind of feels like the reverse of this, where instead of everyone being the saboteur, no one's the saboteur, and decisions were kind of being made arbitrarily. But for the getaway, having completely independent actors essentially I feel like makes for so much more interesting gameplay and to your point, I'm not sure if we'll ever get to a point where people realize that there are more than one snitch, that there is more than one snitch in the game.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like we also kind of talked about this already, but because there's this idea of like self-preservation almost, I feel like once you're in that mindset of being presumably the snitch, but you know that you are working against this like presupposed team. So I feel like your main priority is survival in that and not working on, figuring out whatever the bigger picture might be.
That is a really good point. I can also imagine that, especially in this first episode, we see hints of it. Like Sam at one point is doing his confessional with one of the players, and he says, I think it's Patch, and he says, like, that didn't go great for you, did it? But Patch is like, no, it kind of
That
went
went great.
awesome. And there's a lot to be said about what you're establishing in the first round and how you're building trust to go forward in the game. So let's
Yeah,
let's have a
it's I
conversation about how the game works, shall
let's do
we?
it.
What were you gonna say? Go for it.
I was gonna jump ahead a little bit into the game rules, so let's actually establish the game rules first.
So each contestant is told that they are the snitch. They are provided with a card with in the envelope with their name on it. And as Sam says, we never said there was only one snitch. They have been handed the card. There are 5 loyal cards and 1 snitch card. They just each got handed the snitch card. And we will in a second dive into the logistics of
Mhm.
explaining this more than one snitch. But we have Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, the political scientist. We have Matt Kroll, the gamer. Dan Toomey, the finance guy, question mark. Georgia Dow, the therapist. Patch Lacey, the zoologist. And Stephen Bridges, the card counter. And the day before the game begins, each contestant is told that they're the snitch by Sam. And I love what Sam says. We really like shows where there's a sabotage element. There's never been one that has everyone as the saboteur, and we thought that would be funny, says Ben. They give out a snitch card to every single person. Each of their reactions was hilarious to being the snitch. I just thought that they all seemed delighted at the idea of being the snitch. Nobody seemed particularly like, oh, shoot, I'm dead in the water.
Yeah, and that was actually something I think was intentional if I'm remembering the meet and greet or the Q&A correctly. Um, but there was some very intentional, I think, priorities in casting. First, obviously, we see it here where everyone should have been open to being the snitch. I think that was encouraged. Also, I forget who specifically said it, but it was a point made that they wanted a cast where no one would ask too many questions, which I think is a perfect priority or a
Yeah.
perfect criteria for a game like this. Because if you have someone like the two of us, for example, who might be thinking on an unnecessary level of strategy, the game might get broken in 2 seconds. But if you have these people who are really just there for the experience and to have this game to play along the ride, then you get to toy with them in this fun way, and A, they won't take it personally, but B, they'll also like make the most of it and enjoy it. So
Yes.
I really like that decision.
Yeah, well, we have this moment. I call it snitch masterpiece theater, where Ben and Sam are trying to sort of act out like what would happen if somebody asks you about the snitch. And I think the main takeaway is just kind of try and move on so they don't question it too much.
Mhm.
To your point that they aren't really questioning too much of this game. I really want to focus on this question though. The snitch or snitch? And Sam says doesn't matter. I would argue it does matter.
I think it does, but also think that, to your point, Sam was just trying to skirt the question as fast as possible. I think the ultimate point was, as long as we never disambiguate that there is more than one snitch, then we're fine. Like, as long as that's never made clear, then that air of mystery around who the snitch is, who the snitches are, rather,
Mm.
that there aren't any sort of like holes being punched in that veil.
Hmm. Yeah, I have to point out that there's one piece of like a graphic that shows a piece of paperwork that says like it says something a snitch, not the snitch or whatever. It says a snitch.
Mhm.
I guess it can be like, well, in the event that a snitch is voted out, sure, but also a snitch to me implies one. So I'll have to go read that back now that I'm thinking a little bit more grammatically about it. But it's just such an interesting idea of not giving up. This reminds me of a lot of the discussion that's been had about the traders and do they know how many traders start the game? Do they know
Mhm.
who's involved? I feel like if you look carefully enough, and maybe that's the problem, those players aren't doing it, you could potentially figure out what the twist is here. Because think about it.
Mhm.
The jet lag boys ask you to do a game show. They say there's just one snitch. You just got to get to the end. And then you get made the snitch. Do you ever think to yourself, this is kind of suspicious?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I was in those shoes, I would at some point ask myself the question, what if I don't make it to the end? Like,
Mm,
does the game just continue? Do loyal people just keep voting each other out for no reason? Like, what does the game look like if I, the snitch, am not participating anymore? Um, and that's actually something that I don't think got brought up a ton, like at all, whether it's in this episode or at the Q&A session in New York. So I'm actually really interested in seeing if that could get clarified, maybe.
hmm.
But I know, in a general sense, there was a lot of effort and a lot of time was spent, especially in like the pre-production of the show, in like perfecting like this specific language of making sure that it is not revealed that there is more than one snitch. And I think, looking back on it, the route they took was just making it as ambiguous as possible and never sort of directly addressing the quantity of snitches.
Mm. It I should point out if you're watching this and you haven't watched it yet, we're not spoiling anything quite yet because it's really about who goes home at the end of this episode. But if they make the final two, they are supposedly going to split the snitch stash and the loyal loot. However, in reality, they will only be splitting the snitch stash, and we're going to come to that a little bit later. But
Right.
now I think we're going to start talking real spoilery. So if you haven't watched, get a Nebula subscription. Was it nebula.com/jetlag? Get
Yep.
some get a discount code. They're everywhere. Nebula is a wonderful
It's
service.
$5 a month, I believe.
2 Nebula subscribers maximizing their joint slay. What can we say? And we're excited to talk about it. So this is the sort of blanket spoiler warning. We're really going to get into this strat now. So the cast is at what I believe is the Museum of Neon Signs in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I
I
went back to check to see if they ever said where specifically they were, and I don't think. Yeah, so is that what was that just like a guess? Have you been to the Museum of Neon Lights?
so I have been outside the Museum of Neon Lights. This was a very
Okay.
fun. It felt, in retrospect, almost like a jet lag esque challenge where there's this Museum of Neon Signs. It's really cool. It's in Las Vegas, but it's a little bit out of town. And so myself and my boyfriend were in Las Vegas. It was our last moment before we got on a plane to go back. And we were like, let's go to the Neon Lights Museum and then we'll take off from there and we'll go to the airport. And then we got there and it was like, you either can take a group tour right now, but it's about to be sold out, or you can wait 45 minutes. And we kind of panicked and didn't know what we were going to do. And then, like, the group tour went off without us. And we were like, oh, okay, so we can't go in for another 45 minutes. And then, so we just
Wow.
sat outside for like 15 minutes. Sort of observing what we could from the exterior.
The
Took
perimeters.
yeah, took a photo in front of the sign, took off, but it looks cool. And if I ever go back to Las Vegas, I would surely go back there, especially at night. If you ever look up images of it,
Ooh, I
it seems
bet.
very cool. And I would love to know the permitting process of getting to shoot there. So somebody explain that to me. I'm interested. I'm the only person who might be interested. Let me know. They're looking to find the keys to run off with the loot. And then they get into this iconic van. Katie, I'm kind of loving the aesthetic as you know,
Mhm.
so much to a mystery show like this is the aesthetic. The mole has the iconic, like the green screen, the red screen. What did you think of everything that's been built in Miss Terry's band of merry misfits? I don't know what to call them. Agents?
Yeah, agents, snitches. I guess that's their legal name, snitches. Um, yeah, I do like this, I guess, mode of branding, I guess, where it reminded me of Scooby Doo, obviously with the Mystery Machine. Um, but yeah, I do like this story setup of why these six random people are even in Las Vegas in a van driving to Colorado to begin with, and the idea of having like this stinky old RV as a getaway car. I'm on board with it.
And it was shot really well. I have to say kudos to them. I know filming in a car
True.
is not easy. Got all the angles. It was looking pretty darn good. So kudos to everybody. And of course, this is so different from Jet Lag in that it is not just sort of filmed on iPhones. Clearly, there's sound guys, there's cam ups. I know there was a huge team. They've all talked about how it was such a much bigger production. JD, did they talk about that at all at the NYC screening
Yeah,
event?
I'm trying to remember her name. The director of photography, I think her name was Valentina, talked a lot about how much, like, pretty much exactly what you said, like how much thought went into setting up those shots, how to execute getting those shots, especially in, I think it was three moving vans at once total, like the van that the production's in, the van that the cast is in, and then there's a third van, which I guess mini spoiler is where the eliminated contestants end up going. So keeping track of all three of those is, and on top of that, the filming at the challenge locations, which this first challenge especially, I feel like reveals all of the other challenges buried in that. So huge props to Valentina and the rest of the crew at the Getaway for pulling off some
Oh my
amazing
gosh.
cinematography.
Yeah, it looked good, and I'm sure it was not fun to film in the Las Vegas desert. It's hot out there. Even if it's a dry heat, it is still a heat,
Mm.
and everybody kind of took it like a champ. I was worried for Steven. I was hoping Steven had sunscreen. He seemed a little in need of like an umbrella or something.
I would trust sunscreen to be available. I wouldn't be able to say for sure though.
Right, of course, we couldn't possibly say. So Adam makes a really interesting point at sort of this point in the show.
Mhm.
Also, a great moment where they're going by the Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and they think it's like real life Mario Kart or something,
Yep.
and they just crush all of their dreams simultaneously. Um, Adam says they're all going to be trying hard not to seem suspicious, but none of them are going to be suspicious of any of the others because they think they're the only one. This brings up a very interesting point. In something like the Traders or in the Mole, there is no elimination. In the Mole, there's no elimination mechanic for the
Mhm.
Mole. In the Traders, the elimination mechanic is that the Traders are able to vote you out, such as in this game.
Mhm.
But usually you're protected by something. And in the Traders, it's the ability to murder other players, and it's the Mole, it's you're not going home. So do you think that maybe if they think a little bit more about it, that there's no protection mechanic for them, that it might get a little suspicious?
Absolutely. I think, see, I'm still trying to figure out my thoughts on it because
Hmm.
on one hand you have everyone tasked with sabotaging. No one knows that everyone is tasked with sabotaging. So I mean, there's a part of me that sort of takes in page from like the mole strategy where, because I mean, speaking from like a game designer up above perspective, kind of expecting that at least one person is going to make a mistake because everyone is tasked with making a mistake. Um, and I mean, for any of these challenges, I think to go completely 100% fine without a hitch is very unlikely. So it could just be a case of playing the odds of, okay, these challenges are very easy to mess up. Um, So there will be rationale for someone to be voted out at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to try to strategize as the snitch without having some sort of like mode of protection in that sense.
So there's a moment later in the episode that I thought was so interesting, and I think it to talk about it in this moment. Dan points out that like Patch guessed that it would be trivia, and then sort of was thinking, is that maybe a sign that there's two snitches? Do you think that it would have been funny to give them, because in the mole, right? The mole
Mhm.
knows what the challenge is ahead of time, has a little bit of room to understand how they're going to maneuver their sabotage. Should it have been, I'm thinking it would have been interesting to give them some heads up. Oh, it's all trivia, but everybody knows it's trivia. So
Right.
it would be even funnier to give them the heads up on the challenge, but it's everybody getting the same heads up. Hey, it's going to be trivia. And all of a sudden, everybody is pretending that they don't know, that they know exactly what the challenge is.
See, and now I'm thinking of taking that a step further and just giving everyone the right answers for the trivia and seeing who intentionally misses the question and who doesn't, or who decides to go for the spin and who doesn't.
That is fucking hilarious. That is so diabolical in its own way. I kind of wish they had done it. Oh my god, especially trivia. Trivia's, and there's so much to get into of like what's the
Mhm.
optimal move, what isn't the optimal move. But let's get into it to explain it first. Would it be jet lag content without dunes, JD?
At this point, seemingly not, you know? I feel like desert power has really become a main energy source for Nebula as an empire.
Yeah,
So, of course, we're gonna get Dune content.
the boys are doing it for themselves. So true, so true. I love desert power. I said Chekhov's desert power as I was watching the Australian finale. Oh, okay. So they're doing trivia. You get the question right. The money stays at the loyal loot. You get it wrong, and it goes to the snitch stash. You can elect to spin a wheel instead of answering for sort of a 50-50. Money goes in, money gets put in the snitch stash. Round one, every question is $100. And round three, three players are chosen to answer $300 questions. So everybody's going to get a chance to go, and then three people are going to get a chance to go. And
Mhm.
I think there's also something to be said uh, about like who volunteers and who doesn't. But right now we're going to talk about round one's questions. Uh,
Go for it.
I should say Dan has, okay, I think it's just safe to say that Dan is both of our favorites.
Yeah. I Ben is leaves and he's so funny.
This iconic quote immediately goes, "Why does Miss Terry need us to do trivia in the desert?" And then they point to the wheel because they need to strategize about it. And he says, "Steven, what do we do? We trust you, you card counting Jesus." Which took me out. Steven basically explains the logic of it's pretty much 50-50, except for this one little bit that you don't want to land on. So it's maybe 49-51. But the wheel is
Mhm.
the wheel, and they proclaim maybe it's better if you only are between two to take a guess, but if you don't know it all, spin the wheel, which will come back as a strategy point later this episode. Um, Pretty much everyone gets their question right except for Steven.
Except
But
for
there is a
Steven.
great moment where where George is reading a question and just goes, self-described misogynist Andrew Tate, and Foreign just goes, yes! It should have just cut there. It don't even show us the
Yeah.
question. Jet lag out of context. The getaway out of context event. So everyone plays it straightforward and does not intentionally try to miss. And before we get into Steven getting it wrong, I want to talk about something Adam said that I found super interesting, and I know that we are dying to talk about it. He says what they don't realize is that they're all on the same team. If they could all just figure out if they cooperated, they'd put all the money in the snitch stash. I have so much to say, but I know you do too. So JD,
Mhm.
go off. Like this is a lot to talk about. What if they all just figured it out and worked together?
I mean, yeah, obviously you're going to have that thought when you understand like the entire conceit of the game. But it takes so much to get there, and it takes all six of these players having all of these realizations to then come together and be like, oh. this is actually what the game is. And I think you put, I think and I feel like I've touched on all these points like kind of already, but you have first that self-sufficiency factor where because you've created an other, that other of the loyal list doesn't actually, or whatever they were called, that faction doesn't actually exist, but for every single other player in the game, they think that they do. So they think that there is a group of people that they're playing against. So they're trying to survive amongst all of these other players. And then you have, which doesn't help, the a snitch versus the snitch debacle or what have you, where because you're not making it clear that like, hey, there's only one snitch or there are multiple snitches, you don't there's like even less sort of like concrete information or like even any clues to pick up on to be like, oh, maybe I'm not the only one
Hmm.
in this role as the snitch. So I feel like it's become kind of dependent on sort of like through the player's own unforced errors in which they would have to realize that they could be and rather should be working together to build up this niche pot.
Right.
But again, I feel like that asks way too much. And again, I feel like there's only what, like four challenges before they get to final two. I
Yeah.
don't, I can't imagine that being like enough time for that realization to get made across the board.
Not only that, because I think that is a great point. Like, how are you going to realize that and then take the leap of faith to say, maybe there are other snitches here, so I should out myself? Because if you reveal you're
Mhm.
the snitch and you're the only one, you
You've shot
lose.
yourself in the foot.
You lose.
But I mean, because I've also tried to think about that. If someone else kind of made it obvious that they were the snitch, but I knew that I myself was the snitch, I feel like there has to be a very clear like like not necessarily like explicit, but something that could solidify from another player's perspective, you know, the reality that someone else is also acting in the role of the snitch.
Hmm.
And I don't know if the like any future challenges either would sort of build for that possibility.
Yes. I think there would have to be something that only a snitch would know, like we were talking about with the trivia or
Hmm.
having pre-knowledge of the challenge that would tune somebody into the idea that they might also be on your team. What I want to talk about in this regard is, what if you all realize you're the snitch? You still have to vote somebody out. And then it just becomes Survivor in a
Yeah, that
way that is
completely changes.
completely unmanageable as like a idea. So when you're doing the getaway, you're looking at everybody and going, I'm trying to focus on one specific detail, which is how snitchy they are. Versus in Survivor, you're just looking for any reason to vote somebody out. And
Hmm.
in this case, there's not a lot of strength required. So, for example, in this trivia challenge, all you have to do is know a wrong answer, and the snitch team would benefit. So, there's not really challenge strength to care about. I guess essentially it's loyalty and voting blocks. If you're gonna all reveal that you're the snitch,
Hmm.
it becomes Survivor because you're all still gonna be voting somebody out and then splitting the money at the end. And
I
that
think the optimal play for, I guess, whoever would be like the first one or two people to realize that they're all snitches is to, again, like you said, like sort of make that coalition of, I feel like two snitches even would be enough to be like, okay, here's what the actual game is. But I mean, even then, I was gonna continue to be like, okay, those two can be the only people who know and sort of control the vote that way and keep each other safe. But the win condition for two snitches at the end is still unknown to the players as well.
So
I mean,
that's
by design, but
right. That's a great point. They don't know that essentially when they get to the end with two people, they're both just essentially going to double the snitch stash prize fund.
Right.
They think that it's just I'm getting the snitch stash, uh, right? Or is it that they're just getting the loot? I
They
don't
get
know.
there's two specific like pots. There's a pot for the loyal players,
Mhm.
and then there's the snitch pot, and the snitch wins the snitch pot.
Right.
And the snitch pot just gets double to split between the two snitches at the end.
Mhm. Yeah, I would not take the gamble to tell everybody. No offense to Adam.
That's risky. It's
We
risky.
Adam, we love you so much. I did just play Starships by Nicki Minaj at a wedding recently. Um, because it's a bop, but I'm,
It's a
thinking of you.
banger, certified.
Yeah. But this is to say that even though they could win the most money, is it optimal for you as an individual to even the playing field to let everybody know what the situation is? Or if you can secretly
Mm.
figure out the actual situation, wouldn't it be more beneficial to just keep that information to yourself, get an alliance partner, and then kind of steamroll? I mean, in a group of six, you only need one other person. I mean, this is like triggering to
Yeah,
Survivor
I mean, if
41 through 46, but you just need one.
if the priority is winning, then yeah, I think that is a strategy. But I feel like you brought up an interesting point because at the end of the day, if you're more focused on just getting to the end as a snitch and winning, I feel like that inherently costs you any money that you could be contributing to the pot you'd be winning at the end because any sort of I mean, unless you're careful and unless you kind of have that sort of aforementioned protection of votes from whether it be another known snitch or alliance or what have you, you put yourself out there into becoming the vote and sort of
Mm.
losing everything that you worked for.
It's a very good point. Well, let's talk about Steven and the great big percentage question that ruins his whole day.
Of
Um,
single deck blackjack, which isn't a thing apparently.
so Steven doesn't know the answer to this question about blackjack. He says it's like the worst case scenario to get question wrong. Question one wrong. You get both questions right, you're a hero, but you didn't win any money. You get question one right and question two wrong. You did your best and you maybe earned some secret
Understandable.
money. But question one wrong is just embarrassing and makes it look very suspicious. As makes your behavior look very suspicious. So he
Mhm.
spins the wheel and does actually win the money, luckily, and highlights how ridiculous the entire question is. But there's a moment after he gets it wrong where Foreign says to Patch, I can't believe he got that wrong. He shouldn't have gotten that wrong. And people are casting shade, casting sauce in the little background.
Mhm.
What did you think of utilizing the opportunity of Steven getting this question wrong? What would you have done if Steven gets it wrong and you're in the game?
I mean, yeah, I feel like Foreign played it how you are supposed to play it. Like you are supposed to cast suspicion as subtly as possible, pointing out things that everyone sees. But if you're the person to make a point of it, you then have people turn and go like, "Oh, hey, Foreign's right. It is really weird that Steven didn't get that question right." And then that thought just spirals and spirals and spirals, and then you're in Foreign's position where you're not catching any suspicion or barely catching any suspicion, and then you end up on the other hand with Steven, who obviously becomes the target of the episode because
Mm.
of this decision.
It's interesting too because everybody is essentially motivated to take the heat off of themselves, right?
Mhm.
So Patch is getting this information, and normally we're in a game where somebody says to you, "I'm suspicious of X," you might say, "That's a little too intense." Instead, you go, "Yeah, sure, sounds great. That's
Mhm.
not my name," and it changes the dynamic of how you pass on information about who's being threatened as a potential vote out. Um, there's a little bit more to this game that is so influential in the vote. So Matt doesn't answer his round two question correctly. He does know it,
Mhm.
but he chooses to spin the wheel. and the money, the $300, goes into the Snitch stash. Patch gets it right, and we have another great round of Dan quotes. First of all, what percent sure are you? 4.2, 4.8. And also, Patch gets the question right, and Dan just goes, Patch, zoologist.
Dan, I think if Dan could just be on the show, just cranking out one-liners for the next 5 episodes, I will be so happy.
I will be devastated if he goes home. Was he at the NYC screening? Was everybody
He
at
was.
the screening?
The entire cast was there, yeah.
Did they have anything to say about the game, about the challenge, about how they felt at the time?
Nothing that really stood out to me, honestly. But it did leave the impression on me that this is a cast that like really likes each other, and a cast that really got to enjoy each other's company throughout the filming of all of this. So seeing that they were all able to see like the lightness in the game, and that it wasn't all that serious, and that, you know, at the end of the day they can still joke around and be friends. It was nice. So that made me happy.
It's the opposite of Survivor 46.
Exactly. No one's cropping anyone out of any Instagram pictures.
Okay, we also have to talk about what Foreign says, where he says he doesn't think that the Aristocats is a real movie.
It is, right? Like,
yes,
I know,
of course it is.
I know I'm a child, but that feels correct.
Also, it is one of the answers, because the question is about what movies have essentially like warning, this shit was racist at the time, like is racist. Right. Warnings, and the Aristocats definitely has one of those moments in it. So that was funny. I believe the answer is Beauty and the Beast, unless you're French, and then maybe you find the whole thing offensive. But Foreign also claims to not know the answer to his question, which I think he just genuinely doesn't know the answer to his question. So he spins, and that goes into the loyal loot. So it is a total of $400 in this Snitch stash, and 9,600 still left in the loyal loot. So something to mention is that in the challenges, there's going to be X amount of money up for grabs within the challenge. So in this challenge, there was $1,500 up for grabs based on, you know, the dollar amounts of the questions. I'm curious. I wonder if you have a theory, JD. Will it be the $10,000? Do they portion out the $10,000 with the idea that perhaps the snitches will be successful every step of the way? So, you know, they've already lost $1,500, and now there's only $850 in the pot, or 800. I'm terrible. 8,500. I'm so bad at the like
one of them.
Right, whatever. Or do you think that they will give these snitches the opportunity to earn the full 10,000 or a large chunk of money, or is that 1,500 sort of no longer available for them to pursue? Does that make sense?
That's an interesting question, and I feel like that sort of ties into a question that I just had, which is, what happens to all the money that ends up in the loyal loot? Is that just into the ether?
I think that just funds Jetlag season 12.
I mean, that's also valid. Like, if that's the case, I'm not mad at it.
All the leftover money just goes to the snack zone.
Funding the snack zone, exactly.
Exactly.
Paying my bills, mind you.
The snack economy. Oh man, Dan, another banger as the phone rings. He picks up the phone and says, "Hey babe." And Ms. Terry is not happy. Did they explain Ms. Terry at all? I'm very curious from a production standpoint. Is she on the bus and giving them a call, or is it? I don't know, because she's reacting in real time. But is she reacting in real time? I was very curious.
There's still a lot to the lore of Ms. Terry that is unknown, as far as I'm aware. She seems to be this omniscient Carmen Sandiego-esque figure. I think that's the 411 for now.
I think that's a fair point. We're gonna find out more. I want to know more. I want to know if Ms. Terry is on one of the vans, or if she's recording her bits after. So this is the post-challenge vibe breakdown, and I want to talk about like after the challenge, and also, of course, the optimal strats, right? So Steven is basically a good target, but people also note that Matt lost the money, lost the most money in the game. Dan mentions that Patch guessed it could be trivia and wonders if there could be two snitches in the game, like I talked about. So there's a lot of discussion about the optimal snitch strategy in this challenge. It's get the first question right, get the second question wrong. So how do you feel about this being declared like the optimal strategy and everybody using it as a means of judging whether or not Steven or Matt are the snitch?
I mean, I think it's a strategy that's easy enough to like legitimize, right? Because you're not making yourself too suspicious, but at the same time, you're still sort of working towards your end as, you know, this hypothetical snitch of taking money away from the loyal loot and adding it to your own snitch pot. So yeah, I understand why that's the thinking that I forget who exactly it was who first brought up that sort of like optimal strategy, but I understand that that's the narrative that got pushed because like it makes sense. Like you can explain it and rationalize it, and it's a reasoning that people can get behind whether you believe it yourself or not. Um, but yeah, you see that be like pretty damning for both Matt and Steven as a result.
You mentioned Mafia earlier in this podcast, and as two people who have played, if anyone's watching this and you don't know what these are, people play live reality games, which is like we play Survivor for fun in a group of people, and you and I have played online reality games as well. Essentially, we have watched a lot of I think I'm going to vote for you, or I think it's you X moments where people have to defend themselves. And so I'm very curious, and I'm so glad you're here with me to talk about how you defend yourself in a situation like the two these guys find themselves in. So that's to say, the first thing I want to talk about is how I think that Steven did a much better job of essentially saying, here's the argument for you looking at me, which is he got the question wrong. But I want to say that I didn't do the optimal mole strategy. The optimal snitch strategy. I just lost. I wasn't able to answer my question. It's a hard question. The real person who did the optimal strategy is Matt. And I think this is perfect for a couple of reasons. One, if your name is on the chopping block, you need to have a clear target. You need a distinct,
100%.
Don't vote for me, vote for person X, because the mistake I think people make is, JD, you come up to me, Naomi, your name is out there. And I go, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? You go, well, you have to vote for somebody else. You can't vote for yourself. And so I go like, I don't know who to vote for. Who do you want to vote for? You have to, in that moment, pick the target and go after them. And I think that
you need to commit. And I think Steven did that perfectly.
Yes. Did it so well. Whereas Matt, especially in his final speech, that reminded me so much of Mafia, where it's the final speech and you have to say like, so, I'm a townsperson. And he reminded me of when I was a townsperson and I'd be drunk at like 2 a.m. and I'd be too mad at my friends to want to defend myself. But you just kind of gave up.
He had this line of like, I can only say that I'm not a snitch, and I only know that I'm not a snitch. And I feel like that's the line I hear a lot playing Mafia, where it's like, okay, you don't have anything else to say, so it feels like you just don't have anything to defend yourself with, which sucks.
It sucks, but I also think that what Matt should have done. I'm not here to tell Matt, change the past. It's fine. It's whatever. It's just the getaway. But you have to turn that target right around on Steven. This is why I'm voting for Steven. This is why I think he's the target. And you could say he mentions it sort of while he's throwing Steven under the bus at the end. He says, like, I think it might be reverse psychology, but he doesn't quite articulate that until very late in the game. I think that's the note to end on. If you think people are wishy-washy, well, it's actually reverse psychology to pitch what you think the optimal snitch strategy is and instead do something different. Wouldn't that be what the snitch does? He was too unclear, and I think
Yeah.
that Steven made another great move, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this, which is he got Georgia on his side almost
Hmm.
immediately.
And I think it was revealed at the Q&A that it was Georgia who pulled Steven aside and sort of started that conversation. But I think Steven and Georgia kind of got a leg up here on the rest of the cast because I think they knew that I think they fully understood what the game was requiring of them in that moment of like, okay, you need a vote and you need to be smart about the vote instead of just like casting a vote all willy-nilly. Um, so having Georgia and Steven together link up, formulate a plan, and then you see Steven goes talk to Dan, Georgia goes talk to Foreign and Patch, and execute in the way that they did. I feel like there's there is definitely like that leg up of there is someone who had capitalized on the time that they had to save themselves, and there's someone who sort of let the tides go the other way.
100%. And that's, I think, a big part of these games is I would normally tell somebody, hey, if you're in a group, don't let the group split off if you think you might be in trouble. So in Steven's case, I was very worried. So when I watched this the first time around, I was
Mhm.
very worried for Steven. I thought it was going to be Steven like hook, line, and sinker. I thought he was gone. So because it's so obvious, right? When everybody's the snitch, whoever gets brought up first, great. It's and that's what happens a lot in the traders too. Like the
Mhm.
very first person
The
to sort of
first name that you hear is sort of like there's a windfall effect from there.
yeah, the first person who catches heat in the traders usually ends up going, and it's usually always a faithful. But in this example, I thought Steven was really dunzo, and I thought he was dunzo when he split off two moments I thought could have sent him packing, but actually ended up being really good for him, which is I think a testament to how well he played this. He splits off from the group immediately. And so you have a group of four and you have you with Georgia. And I thought, oh
Mhm.
no, these four guys are just going to come together, whether they like it or not, because Dan seems quite scared at the idea
Yeah.
of voting and strategizing.
And that's all real, by the way. Like Dan admitted himself was like not excited for like any sort of like strategy or like deception part of the game.
Kind king. Yeah, Dan was unsure. So then you have Matt and Patch, who are friends and are technically a duo at this point. And
Mhm.
you have Foreign, who they don't know where he stands. So they break off from the group, and all of a sudden you have 4 versus 2, which is what the vote ends up being, but a little bit different. So I thought
Mhm.
that might be bad for Steven. And then Steven said something else. I wrote it in my notes. Steven says to Dan, if I were going to be a snitch, what I would do is, and then he explains the optimal strategy. And I thought that was a terrible way of phrasing it because I feel like you should
Mhm.
not say, if I was the snitch, here's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of like calling back to like Mafia or like Blood of the Clock Tower even. It's like if I was this is what I would do. But then I mean, you. I feel like regardless of whether or not that is true, you then force people to think about what if you are the snitch? What if you are a member of the mafia? What does that world look like? So I agree that it was a little bit of a misstep, and I think it was. I think also because a timing thing where because admittedly, I don't think they had a ton of time to like go around and strategize and talk to each other, where you don't take that moment to be like, oh wait, does that mean like should I be reading more into what this person is saying or not? I don't think you're like given the time to do that particularly in
Mhm.
this scenario.
So before we get into the a little bit more detail about the strategy, something I want to talk about, especially you and I having done sort of live reality games, the sort of cutaways to the producer RV that we're getting.
Mhm.
We're getting to see Video Village in the RV. We're seeing the boys at the monitor,
Good job,
and
my boys. Up.
they're spouting a lot of interesting ideas. It's where we get these interesting comments from Adam. But what I found to be quite interesting is that it really influenced how I read the edit because there would be moments that I know are just genuine real-time reactions of someone like Ben saying, oh, I think Steven's done for, or like, oh, we wrote that question for him and like we thought he would know it, but he doesn't know it. And every person in that van sort of having opinions about what was going on in the game. And it didn't lead me to believe that Steven was in a bit more danger. I am kind of a believer that producer commentary in a show shouldn't give that much away. And this is just my personal opinion. JD doesn't even need to subscribe to this. But I would have liked maybe a little bit less input by the time that the strategy portion was happening, because at that point, I think you know this as well. When you're watching strategy, when you are watching everybody have a conversation, you never know what somebody's actually thinking. If you're in it, you know what you're thinking, but you don't know what the other person is thinking. And so when you're an outside producer, an outside observer, you don't fully have all the information. So you're kind of making your best guess. But as the viewer, and as somebody who works on like these reality games, I kind of don't want that input at that point in time. It's great for the start of the game. And it's great as like okay, Mac up, like this person gets voted out. Here's the impact I think that will have.
Like this is the one place where, yeah, I you have a point there. I think I agree with you in the sense that it has the ability to like disrupt your like current perception of how like you think the game might be going. If you hear the producer say, oh, this person looks like they're in a lot of trouble, you will then start thinking, oh, if the people who are watching this show closer than I am are saying, oh, this person looks like they're in trouble, then maybe this person is in trouble when I didn't think they were. So yeah, I understand the point you're making there, but I also feel like that's kind of part of like the jet lag brand almost. And that's not to say that the Getaway is under the jet lag brand, because I don't believe it is. But it has that, like you have Sam and you have Adam and Ben and you have a bunch of people from Wendover and a bunch of people from Nebula who are already working on jet lag, also working on the Getaway. So I feel like stylistically, because of, you're going to get similarities there. So in those moments of high tension, you're going to hear, like in jet lag, in those moments of high tension, you're able to know what Sam, what Adam, what Ben are thinking, what Toby or whatever fourth guest are thinking, because you know they have a camera to their face and you're able to talk. And I feel like the closest parallel to that for something like the Getaway is having sort of like that peanut gallery watching along with you and sort of giving their own thoughts with that disclaimer of like they don't actually know like what the outcome is going to be. They know as much as we do as the audience.
Yes, I think that's a really fair point. Which is why it's so exciting. I mean, I love that we're seeing them. I think it's really entertaining. Sam is a great presenter, I have to say.
I
He has
agree.
really evolved, I think, since the first season of listen, if you're a Nebula subscriber, don't forget there's that first crime spree season of Jet Lag that truly has
Right.
so much weight on future events. And I think Sam has become such a fabulous presenter and host. He's got the cheekbones for it. You know what I mean? The cheekbones for a threatening message. And so
An assertive
sometimes,
message.
so it's great to see them all get an assertive message. It's great to see them when they have their opinions. But in the strategy, I almost felt like I was trying to read the edgic of like what these producers are telling me, which, you know, whoever does the edgic for the Getaway, good luck to you. That's your problem.
Does an edgic for the Getaway exist? I would be shocked, honestly.
What is Dan like? Is Dan like more 3 or whatever? I don't even know.
No, I feel like it would be, no, Dan is definitely like OTTP for like they always give like the comic relief OTTP and whatnot.
something I wanted to point out is that there's about an hour drive. I mapped it out from the game site to the Donkey Museum. So you have an hour to be in the car, and then let's
Mhm.
say an hour to be in the Donkey Museum strategizing. It honestly, it really felt like 30 minutes. But I think that the car is an underrated RV is an underrated aspect of the strategy where you're presenting ideas to the entire group and everybody kind of has to listen to you. And I
Mhm.
thought that Steven was very vocal, whereas Matt was maybe a little more chill about his defense. And in some ways, Steven was incredibly vocal this whole episode when he knew that his target was active and blinking and shining
Mhm.
bright on his back. Do you think that Matt should have exploited how, I don't want to say desperate in like a bad, but how desperate he was to continue to play the game and say, well, that's what a snitch would do. A snitch doesn't want to go out because then the game is over.
Yeah, I mean, and deflection is a valid strategy, and I think that's something Matt could have been maybe a little more focused on if the goal was like survive the vote. Focusing on just how hard it seemed like Steven was working to stay in the game should raise flags if you're paying attention, but I guess it's just not something that was capitalized on.
Hmm. So when it comes to this donkey strategy, well, actually, I want to point out the funniest
Mhm.
moment of the episode for me, which is when Foreign in the car says it would be absolutely heinous and unethical to put the only black character as the criminal that betrays everyone. And then Dan says to have it be Foreign or Georgia would be a crazy move. That I was laughing
Mhm.
so hard.
It's like the classic horror movie stereotype.
I was just like, oh my god. And it's great because they know that it's not any of them, but it's also a hilarious thing for Foreign to say
Mhm.
because it is him. It
With
is
the knowledge
everyone.
that he is the Stitch, yeah.
Yes. But if you're Foreign or Georgia, you're kind of like, yeah, let's go with that narrative. Like,
Mhm.
don't even think about that.
Totally, it's not
Oh
me. Ha
man.
ha ha.
Also Dan, I love the through line of the strategy of Dan wanting to buy a shirt and then he bought the shirt.
And then he bought the shirt, yep. By the time it was ready to vote.
What did you find compelling about this strategy session in the Donkey Museum?
I feel like this was such like a perfect first round of game. I feel like everyone got like a really solid sense of like familiarity with how the game works, what the rules are, what the flow of every round is going to be. And I feel like especially with this, I guess, perceived vote flip from Steven to Matt, I feel like every aspect of the game is sort of getting fully fleshed out in what the snitch might be capable of doing in the task to what they might be capable of doing in the vote, what you know the perceived strategy of these non-existent loyal teams, like what would they be doing and how
Mm.
the snitch is meant to be emulating that behavior. It brings up a lot of interesting sort of like challenges, like unspoken challenges that I think this cast is going to do a good job at sort of showing their stuff or what have you.
I do appreciate that this was a cast where everybody was ready to play, essentially, except for Dan by round one. And I don't blame Dan because it's very hard. But the fact that Georgia goes up to Matt and is like, so here are the things I think are suspicious about your behavior. One,
Hmm.
you got the questions wrong in this order. Two, you and Pat are friends. I was like, oh my God, she's just going for it. I also thought this was maybe going to sink Steven's boat a little bit, but she just put her strategy so out there in front of two people
Hmm.
she sort of needed to convince, which are Patch and Foreign. I thought it was a really bold move from her while Steven was working Dan, and it pays off in a big
Yeah, it
way.
was really smart, I feel like, because I think you kind of want to be able to. I feel like Georgia did a really good job at looking like a good player there, like looking like a non-snitch there
A
by saying
loyal
like
villager.
a loyal villager exactly, by saying like here is the person that I find suspicious, here is why I find them suspicious, And it's that kind of thinking and that kind of framing of like mindset and narrative, I think, that really ends up saving Steven ultimately.
I was surprised that we didn't get the classic, like, I'm loyal, I'm a loyal, like, the traders class, like, I'm faithful, I don't know about you, like
Oh
that
yeah,
kind
like the
of,
loud, I'm loyal, I could never be a snitch.
I
It's
can
not for
never be a
me.
trader. Yeah. I was shocked that language didn't get used more, but I like that. I feel like reality TV shows always establish a language very early on of like, this is what's cool, this is what isn't cool, this is how
Mhm.
we, communicate our ideas about strategy, whatever. Survivor is so heavily influenced by Richard Hatch winning the first season. And this game, who knows if there's going to be another season, but I think that Georgia playing so strong out of the gate, Steven being very articulate in his points, and Matt
Mhm.
also playing it very cool and very sort of casually emotional. Um, there was a lot going on, I think, that established that going forward, it's going to be quite the cutthroat competition. I'm
Yeah, I
very
feel like
excited.
all of the like if there were a second iteration of this show, I feel like all of these strategies can sort of be like expounded upon and was evolved. There we go.
So there was a moment, I want to know your theory. There's a
Mhm.
moment in their sort of last when they're on the block, when Steven and Matt are on the block, that Steven forgets the word snitch. And
I caught that.
I thought that might have been like 5D chess. I don't know about you.
Do you
My
think it was
theory
intentional?
my theory is that, like, okay, what do you do? What do you know for sure? That you're the snitch. So what do you need to do? Convince them and mess up in a way that the snitch would never mess up in? And is
Mhm.
it to pretend that you forgot what this thing is called in the game? Because you could say traitors or mole or something. I don't know. I was wondering if that was intentional or if he was just really nervous. I want to believe, I want to gaslight myself into thinking it was intentional.
I would love if it was intentional. I think it would be absolutely genius if it was, because it could also be passed off as like a very simple error, or not error, but like a lapse in memory. I feel like it's forgetting such a huge part of the game. I feel like not it's not like a how could you forget that? It's a, oh, this isn't something you're constantly thinking about. So it makes sense for that. You maybe lost your train of thought for a couple seconds and forgot what you're supposed to be looking for. So
Mhm.
I don't know. It could go either way. I do think it's genius though, because I feel like Steven could then rest on that rationale of, oh my god, I truly just forgot what the word was.
I'm praying. I hope Steven's like that. Like, like the card guy.
Yeah, the poker player, the card
We're
counter.
we're genius stands. So like, I know that poker players don't let me down when it comes to being like sleuthy
Hmm.
little bastards. I want to see
Little
it.
clever mathematicians.
So also in the closing remarks, Matt, I wrote this in my notes, has a poor defense of himself, doesn't have a good answer, doesn't commit to an enemy, and doesn't have an answer for why it's not him. I think the biggest mistake in his speech, in any game of Mafia, or if you're going to go do the getaway with your friends, the biggest thing to do is to say it's not me, it's X person.
Hmm.
And just saying I know it's not me doesn't give people the illusion of choice. Essentially, is what you're trying to drum up. You're trying to give
Right.
them the idea that, like, oh hey, it's either Steven or Matt. They already know that, but you need to reassure them. Somebody on Reddit said something interesting. They said that Matt's faltering was all the way back at the question, and that he should have, because he knew the right answer, just gotten it down to two and been like, I'm just going to choose an answer I think it might be, and chosen the wrong answer. How do you feel
Mm.
about that? I don't know if that would save him from what befalls
I'm
him.
not sure it would either, because my first instinct is to then look at that as like one big act, because at the end of the day, you still got the question wrong, you still cost us money. So that's something that as a loyal villager, you're not supposed to do. So
Yes.
as me as Snitch faking loyal villager, I would look at someone getting a question just like flat out wrong as like, okay, that's actually suspicious.
Exactly. Interesting. So the phone rings and Dan says, "What?"
Wow.
Give Dan the
Honestly,
phone the entire
if
game.
does Dan have I'm gonna post this question now and we can circle back to it next week.
Mm,
Does Dan have like a different opening line for every single time he answers the phone?
God, I'm
Like, does
praying.
he
Dan
have
doesn't
one
hear me
ready
now.
for the whole season?
Dan, if you can hear me now, please. Like, I need the comedy. I need the humor. I think he will. I think he totally will.
I wouldn't put it past him. He's been quite the funny man so far.
So, going into this vote, what did you think was going to happen, JD, at this point in the game? Who did you think was going home?
Yeah, so the cards did seem pretty stacked in or against Steven's favor going into it, especially since everyone seemed to be talking about the getting the question that he should have gotten right wrong. But as like the strategy talks kept going, it became clear that there was more like actual reasons being presented as to why people were voting for Matt versus voting for Steven. So at the end, I feel like the edit sort of like led me there as to why it was Matt instead of Steven. So I was there was a part of me I feel like that was still maybe expecting it to be Steven, like the sort of double fake out, but I wasn't all that surprised that it was Matt either.
Yeah. Well, they are putting the chips with the player's name into a bag, sort of to the side.
Mhm.
I just
You're not a fan of the bag.
I want to give some survivor feedback. Sam, Ben, Adam, thank you for watching up until this point. We love you. You can follow me back on Twitter. No, just kidding. But
Mhm.
here's the thing: as Survivor fans, I think there is something so important to the voting confessional. The voting
Like a vote
confessional,
reveal?
it
Or
just
yeah, the confessional and the reveal.
yeah, it allows people to express their final opinion on the matter at hand privately to get their
Mhm.
thoughts out right before they're going to vote. Because when you're filming these confessionals, if you're not filming right before the vote happens, then you don't have their in the moment opinion on what's occurred so
Right.
far. So you need that last little confessional to have something to go off of. And yeah, we gotta get these bitches an urn. We gotta get them something. I mean, I love you guys, but like,
What's your suggestion for like a getaway alternative for a voting urn?
I'm gonna bring this question to you too. Don't leave me out to dry.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm
I
I'm
think
trying to think of mine.
I think maybe like another silver suitcase. And
Mm.
either you have a slot for like 6 votes, so 6 chips. So you put the chip in, and you put the chip in and it will slide into like a spot in this briefcase, and then you're going to open the briefcase up and reveal what the vote count is, um,
Mhm.
or just like a larger, maybe like a piggy bank. I don't know, like it just needs something that is modified in a way where either you take the votes out or you reveal them all at once, but that isn't just like a little bag. And I get it, but like, you know, it just needs. It reminded me so much of in Survivor Samoa, where there's like the self-run challenge.
Mhm.
It just needed somebody there a little bit. I
Yeah,
understand the
a
mystery on the
little
phone.
push.
Needed like a butler or a henchman.
Mm. Yeah, I don't have a solid idea for like
It's
voting
hard.
confessionals, but I did have an idea for like the elimination reveal, and this isn't even like a vote reveal either. But I was thinking like one at a time, giving each of the cast like a key back into the van or something.
Oh, you devious. That would
But like
be
again, that
so
doesn't answer
good.
the question of like how can we gussy up, how can we fancy up this vote reveal?
But even that is compelling, at least, like that. It's like, here's your key back to the van, here's your key back to the van, very, very HOH key wheel, right? In
Yeah,
Big
very that.
Brother. But to your point, I agree with you. So let's talk about this idea. Should it be a anonymous vote reveal? An anonymous vote reveal. So that's to say that we don't know what the vote count is. We just know that, Matt, you're eliminated, and we need you to leave.
Actually, I think that would allow. I would be a fan of that. I think that allows even a little more room for the snitch to sort of create more chaos. But because you can lie about a vote, you can maybe frame someone else for a vote. It opens up even more options to cast suspicion upon others, which I think is what the snitch would want.
I also think it would give people sort of this really funny ability to either throw hinky votes, right? Someone like Dan, I thought Dan was going to throw a hinky vote, although it's such a small group that you would assume that throwing a hinky vote would then make everybody mad at you, so maybe you don't do it.
Yeah, hinky, especially now that there's only 5 votes, a
Yes.
hinky vote could really mess things up, mess a certain plan up.
Well, not only that, you could put hinky votes in there, but also if you're like Georgia and Steven and you want to vote as a group, you just 3, 2, 1 it. You dilute the votes. You say, "Oh, we're going to vote this way," but really you have the numbers to vote this way. You can just vote people out strategically if there's more of an anonymous voting mechanism. Now, you can do it in person too, but I think that draws too much attention to you.
Yeah.
Now, this is also a game where information is super key. And if you're designing the game, obviously we're designing it with the snitches in mind. You would also be designing it as if the loyal team is in the game and you're concerned about the information that they have. So a 4-2, knowing that it's a 4-2 vote is good information.
That's also true, yeah.
But I don't want them to have all their information.
You want to make it even harder for this non-existent team.
So Steven and Georgia vote for Matt. Matt votes for Steven, and the rest are revealed after the fact. And the votes are read. It's 4 votes Matt, 2 votes Steven. Did you think that Patch voted with Steven for Matt? Or sorry, that Patch voted with Matt for Steven?
I did. That was my assumption. I thought the 4-2 vote was Matt and Patch voting for Steven and everyone else voting for Matt.
I did too. I was gagged. That was and a good move by Patch, I think, because then you sort of integrate yourself. If George is coming after you and your friend, and you already kind of know your friend is dead in the
some
water.
credibility with Georgia for sure.
Yes.
Who is seemingly a very influential player.
Seems like it. She's definitely got her eye on the prize and understands where she's trying to fit in the group. And has a real leadership quality to her. She reminds me of so many women I've watched played LRGs. She's so funny, so straight to the point, right in your face, tell you what you're thinking, and people seem to respect it and go along with it. I was also thinking, what happens if you read the votes and your name is in the voting urn? That's when you just need, a silent butler to hold up, the chips. A dealer. We need our dealer friend.
Or whoever drives the RV, get them to do it.
Yeah, where is the RV driver as the character? I need him. That would be funny if he's like the driver / henchman helping them get across town.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty great. So Patch voted for Matt, saying Matt played beat for beat what a snitch would do. And I think that's really what ends up being the nail in Matt's coffin, is that he did everything a snitch would do and had no good defense as to why he did it. So Matt just awkwardly walks off. I'm so sorry. We love you. I don't want to dig on the production, but Matt just walked off, which I thought was hilarious. He should have just waited. The phone should have picked up and Miss Terry should have been like, "Okay, Matt, it's time for you to leave." But instead he just...
Yeah, that would have been a lot less awkward.
It was a little weird. So JD, how do you feel about Matt being the first to go in this episode?
Yeah, this is true of everyone except for Dan, but I wasn't really familiar with Matt before this show, but I feel like he brought a very and like, I mean, again, this is true for all of them, but they Matt brought like a very enthusiastic energy to the show, and even as he was getting voted out, and even as he sort of started realizing that the walls were closing in on him, you could still tell that like he was enjoying that his experience, he was still having fun, and that he wasn't, turning it into a downer for everyone. So, at the end of the day, I appreciate someone who is down for a game and then doesn't get upset when things don't go their way. So major respect to Matt for that.
He was a good sport, and it's only 6 days, but they seem very close, and it seems like a lot of fun. I'm happy for everybody involved, but I know how heartbreaking it is to be voted out first on like a day, or voted out at the start of a journey. It's never fun, and you never want to be that person. But he took it, I think, in stride. And then Sam revealing at the end. That is so LRG coded, though. That is so like you just get voted out, and everyone's like, "Do you want to know why you got voted out?" And you're like, "No, I want to recover for a second. Leave me alone."
Just a second to breathe.
That was really funny.
At
Yes,
least.
Sam reveals everyone's the snitch, and Matt says, "You motherfucker," and we cut. Great ending. A very entertaining episode. So
Great pilot.
Great pilot. JD, I want to ask you, what do you think is going to happen next in the larger context of the game? We've already had the meta of that's exactly what the snitch would do, so I think you're the snitch. And we've also had maybe that's reverse psychology. The snitch is pretending to not do the right thing. And of course, the idea of how do you get money for yourself as the snitch? Do you have any speculations on where we're going in terms of strategy?
Yeah, I think I'm sure there's going to be like some big moment, right? Where one player is going to be forced to make like some massive decision that will either massively help out this loyal team, which again, adding money to a pot that no one's going to win, or they have to like do something that casts a huge amount of suspicion on them. So I could see that coming up in the pipeline, and I'm curious to see if it's only one person who has to face a decision like that, if it's everyone who has to face a decision like that. How do people respond to having to make such a like crunch time decision? I'm really curious to see how this game goes. Also because we're looking at this entire show from being fans of like Survivor and Big Brother and The Challenge and all of these social strategy shows where we're used to thinking about the strategies of voting people out of games essentially. But none of these people know anything about that. So we're having these guinea pigs have a field day in social strategy. So I feel like you can't really predict what any of them are going to do because they're all so new to it, and they could really just end up doing whatever.
Yeah, gosh. There's a lot to be said about what's coming down the pipeline. I'm very excited. I like a short reality show. I don't want these Netflix the moles. Oh, what's gonna happen? Tune in 5 weeks and you'll find out. I love a quick, to the point kind of reality show. So I'm so glad we're covering this together. I cannot encourage enough the viewers. If you're not already a Nebula subscriber, go subscribe. I not only recommend I not only recommend Nebula for the Getaway, for jet lag content, for being ahead of the curve, but I also recommend it for creators that I love, like Big Joel, Patrick Willems, Lindsay Ellis just put out. She finally posted on YouTube, but she's got a lot of stuff in there that she hasn't posted on YouTube. And the Layover podcast is so good. Sam getting enraged at the fans for not understanding what the funniest jet lag moments are fucking sent me, because he was so right. He was like,
I
"That's
need to
not
catch
funny."
that episode. I missed it.
Oh, it's
I
the
haven't
Family
listened to
Feud
it yet.
episode where like it's like, what are the top 10 funniest things? And it's just like Adam. And he's like, what does that mean? That's not anything. What are you talking about? It's
Just
so
Adam.
good. We love Adam. We love Adam walking around. Personally, my favorite jet lag moment is Adam walking around in his disguise, which is a huge straw hat, a skirt, his
blonde wig.
his arms like exposed to the sun because he rolled up his t-shirt, so his bright white like shoulders are shining, and he's wearing fucking New Balances, so it's like the ugliest outfit you've ever seen, the least inconspicuous person you've ever seen in your life. I was rolling on the floor laughing at that moment when I watched it the first time.
So ridiculous.
Love
I gotta
him.
think about my favorite jet lag moments. I have a lot.
Okay, well that'll be for next week, so
Yeah.
listeners should tune in. JD, is there anything you want to talk about that you have going on in your little world right now, or
In my little world, unfortunately, I will be tuning into Big Brother. Um,
I'm so
whether or
sorry.
not whether or not I make any of my opinions public will be yet to be determined. Um, yeah, TBD. Other than that, not really. I'm just vibing. Catch me online if you're down for shenanigans. I'm on Twitter /X at Deadcrush. That's DEADCRSH. I am on Instagram, same thing, but it is DEAD.CRSH. Uh, is that all the social? I think that's all the social media I own. Follow me on Spotify if
Work.
I don't know if that's something you're into. If you want to stalk the music I'm listening to, I'm open for that. How do you even plug a Spotify? My Spotify username is like a bunch of numbers or something.
Just follow you on Twitter and then you'll find it. DM
Yeah,
DM JD
easy.
for a good playlist. That's
Hell yeah. I'll hit you up with a good playlist. That's for sure.
great. And if you want to follow me, I'm at Naomi Calhoun on Twitter. I just want to say thank you, JD, for being here. If you like Silent
Thank
Podcast,
you for having me.
I love you. You know I love you. If you like Silent Podcast, you got to go check us out on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter. The Big Brother season is coming. I know that everyone on this channel network is going to have so many fucking opinions. I've already muted the BB26 hashtag. I'm so excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we've got mole coverage. We've got Gia, Nicole, and I just wrapped up Top Chef season 21. That finale podcast was unhinged, so check it out. We've got Taskmaster. We've got Australian Alone. We've got oh my god, what are they doing with the Australian? They've got Australian traders coverage everywhere. So
Wow.
stay tuned on Silent Podcast for all of your favorite reality TV shows.
We got it all.
We've got it all.
Truly.
And we're nothing. It's not nothing but silent. We're anything but silent.
Anything but silent.
We're nothing but silent. Anyways, we're out of here now. And of course, subscribe to Nebula and Jetlag. Support independent artists. Thank you so much, JD. Oh, and follow Survivor New York if you're interested in watching fake Survivor.
Oh, yeah.
Survivor New York on Instagram and Facebook. Okay, let's get out of here. We gotta go. The van's pulling away. Bye.
Bye. See you.